Blood is at the center of the VRising experience, so it makes sense that the Blood skill tree is the first in our series of ranking videos that we dive into. Hey there friends, it's Codiak here, welcome back to Legacy Gaming. Today, we're taking a deep dive into Blood abilities, what they are, how you unlock them, and ultimately, if they're any good. As always, when doing a ranking video here on the channel, I like to start by making it crystal clear. This type of content, these rankings are subjective. What we think is good or bad may not be what you think is good or bad, and that's fine. We always appreciate you letting us know in the comments, and in many cases, you guys actually change our minds on a ranking, so let's just start on the same page before we dive in. Now, to do a proper rankings video, at least in our eyes, you have to establish some sort of ground rule, something to keep us honest about how and why we're ranking things the way that we did. For our VRising series, we're keeping things relatively simple, focusing on three key areas: effectiveness in PvE, effectiveness in PvP, and utility. All of the abilities are running through that filter and hopefully allows us to more accurately characterize everything we're talking about. The goal is for us to reveal each rank and you guys to agree, or at least be close. So with the disclaimer out of the way and the ground rules established, let's break it all down with the rankings. First on our list is Blood Rage. This ability allows players to shield themselves and nearby allies for 110% of the caster's spell power and increase attack speed by 25% for 4.5 seconds. To get Blood Rage, players need to defeat the V-Blood unit Rufus the Foreman at the Bandit logging camp in central Farbane Woods. When push comes to shove, this is a clear case of an early ability you'll have access to that might be fine in the early game, but just lags behind something awful in the mid to late game. In PvE, there is some value in the shielding component, as we'll talk about with other abilities, but Blood Rage's 110% is paltry compared to better options. Its other effect, that 25% attack speed bonus, is fine, but at the end of the day, it's only really impacting your basic attacks, which honestly aren't that important mid to late game. You're going to lead with everything else, your weapon abilities and spells. The added bonus of being able to buff your allies is a nice touch, but ultimately, Blood Rage just suffers from a lack of viability long term, which is why it gets a D rank. Next on our list is Blood Rite. This allows players to block melee and projectile attacks for 1.5 seconds. If successful, the blocking player receives 30% of their spell power back as a heal and triggers a wave of energy that pushes the attackers away, dealing 100% magic damage. Blood Rite is accessible right from the start of the game and is one of the two standard abilities every player has access to during the tutorial process. Much like Blood Rage, this ability just doesn't stand up long term. I would say it's got an even shorter shelf life because it's just not that viable in most situations. Yes, it gives you a guaranteed way to block an attack, and that's really its saving grace because you can use it to great effect if your timing is right. But in both PvE and PvP, it just doesn't stack up against the onslaught of other abilities, especially other counters and shields. One of the issues too is that Blood Rite's healing component scales off your spell power, not the actual attack. So unless you invest heavily, you're not seeing a whole lot of impact. Long story short, this is an interesting ability on paper, but fails to really thrive in the game because it's just not that good, and for that reason, we're giving it a D rank. The next ability, Crimson Aegis, allows players to apply a shield to themselves or a targeted ally for 200% of the caster's spell power. When applied, the shield also knocks back any enemies nearby. To get Crimson Aegis, you need to defeat the V-Blood unit Grayson the Armorer at the Bandit Armory in central Farbane Woods. While purely a defensive ability, Crimson Aegis scales incredibly well long term, and while there are slightly better versions of similar types of abilities, getting Crimson Aegis early is huge, especially when confronting challenging V-Blood units or players in PvP. It really boils down to two things: that 200% spell power shield and the utility of being able to control the knockback. If you focus on boosting your spell power, you'll really see the effects of that 200% shield. On the other hand, the flexibility to choose when to trigger a knockback is also great. It's a really potent tool in a variety of situations, which is why Crimson Aegis is getting an A rank. Next up is Sanguine Coil, a skill shot spell that allows you to launch a projectile that deals 75% magic damage and leech 40% health on an enemy hit. If used on an ally instead of an enemy, it heals the ally for 100% and the caster for 40% of their spell power. I should also point out that you get 3 charges with this spell. To unlock Sanguine Coil, you need to kill the V-Blood unit Meredith the Bright Archer in the Haunted Iron Mines in southern Dunley farmlands. Be warned, there is also an undead commander as well as a ton of undead in the mines, and they'll fight any humans they run across, and it can get a little chaotic. Sanguine Coil is a really interesting ability, one that I actually used quite a bit during progression. I think my favorite aspect of it is the multiple charges, because it gives you multiple options to make an impact, and because each attack triggers some sort of self-healing, it's providing both damage and utility. The one real drawback here is the lack of damage. That 75% is just weak compared to other spells in the game, and while some folks might not mind, it becomes a big issue the later you get into VRising. Ultimately, it comes down to what you want out of your spells, and for the most part, people are either going to lean further into offensive or further into defensive, which puts Sanguine Coil in this weird middle space. We should also point out that with a 100% Scholar blood buff, this spell heals for much more, and now has a chance to be a free cast, but again, it's all dependent on getting high blood buffs consistently. Other spells deal more damage or heal for more right out of the gate, so it gets lost in the shuffle, and for that reason, we're giving the ability a B rank. Our next ability, Shadowbolt, is pretty standard fare. The single cast projectile deals 200% magic damage and inflicts a 1-second fading snare, which means it's more effective at the start but wears off quickly. This is one of the first abilities you get as a player in VRising, so it's not connected to any V-Blood units. It's hard to bash any ability because it's simple, but sometimes simple is effective, and that's really the case with Shadowbolt. Its 200% magic damage is solid, and while it's unclear exactly how magic damage scales off of spell power, you just need to use the ability a few times to realize it gets the job done. The added value of a short snare is really nice, but not necessarily a game changer. It's great in PvP for quickly slowing down an enemy that might be chasing you, or in PvE giving you a second to reposition, but it's on the weaker end of the utility spectrum. Ultimately, this is a good introductory skill that stays relevant throughout most of the game, but eventually gets outshined, and for that reason, we gave it a C rank. Our next ability, Veil of Blood, is the Blood Tree's travel skill. This allows you to dash towards a given direction, avoiding attacks for 2.2 seconds. When breaking out of the pseudo-stealth, the next attack deals 25% bonus damage and heals for 5% of your maximum health. This is the first travel skill players get in the game and doesn't need to be unlocked. You get it almost instantly during the first 30 minutes of your VRising experience. Now let me just say this, I don't hate Veil of Blood. It's a really good foundational skill that allows players movement and recovery, and that's a really important aspect of the game early on. The thing about Veil of Blood is though, it doesn't really wow you with its effects. You get the movement speed, okay, all travel skills have that. You get bonus damage, and let's be honest, 25% on a primary attack isn't going to add much to the equation, especially considering most others have that as well. And finally, you get a 5% heal based on your max HP. This is probably the best aspect of the ability, but even still, once you tap into different blood types, potions, and other ways of recovery, this becomes such a non-factor. It's not a bad move, like I said, but it's also not stellar, which is why it gets a C rank. Our final two abilities are both blood-specific ultimates. Crimson Beam is most likely the first one that you'll unlock. When cast, you'll channel a beam of energy that deals 150% magic damage to enemies hit and heals allies for 100% of your spell power per second, up to 4 seconds. Each target that you hit with the beam heals you for 25% of your spell power. To unlock Crimson Beam, you need to kill the V-Blood unit Raziel the Shepherd in the main building of the Dunley Monastery, and word of warning, you will need holy resistance if you hope to survive. All in all, I really like this ability. It's one of the ultimates I kept in rotation for quite a while, as I found the balance of damage and healing to be pretty solid. It felt like an ultimate ability, and that's really crucial when dealing with these critical moves. If they don't feel impactful, they definitely don't deserve to be used, but Crimson Beam manages to hit its mark. However, the ability isn't perfect, and if we look at it from both a PvE and PvP perspective, it's actually pretty flawed in a PvP setting. The ability causes the player to become stationary, and because its rotation speed isn't great, a smart combatant can dodge the beam and then wail on the player without fear of repercussion. This is a huge blind spot in the ability's effectiveness, but really doesn't come into the picture unless you consider PvP. It is good, and everyone should try out Crimson Beam for at least a little bit, but at the end of the day, we have to stay true to our process, which is why Crimson Beam is getting a B rank. Our final blood ability is Heart Strike. This is a powerful ultimate that allows players to dash forward in a straight line, dealing 150% magic damage as well as healing the player for 150% of their spell power over 3.5 seconds. Additionally, for every target hit with the initial dash, a Blood Nova will explode shortly after, dealing 150% magic damage to them and nearby targets. To get Heartstrike, you'll need to kill the V-Blood unit Wilfred the Werewolf Chief in Gloomgrave Village. A special note, you can only engage with Wilfred during the night. If you go to the village during the day, he'll be in his human form. Straight up, Heartstrike is awesome, an incredibly potent ability in both PvE and PvP that provides superb damage, mobility, or the means to reposition, as well as recovery. It checks off all the boxes and really doesn't have a downside. The one real argument you could make is that the ability performs much better with multiple targets, and if you manage to line up a bunch of enemies and trigger the Blood Nova, it's game over. The damage is insane, but even on a single target encounter, bosses, or a singular PvP engagement, it still lights out. The percentages for both damage and healing is generous, and the added mobility factor actually weighs in quite a bit because you can use this ultimate as a means of also repositioning and getting in on a better spot for an engagement. It's a great ability everyone should work into their build at some point, which is why we're giving it an S rank. Blood abilities are a mixed bag. On one hand, you have some powerful spells like Heartstrike, Sanguine Coil, and Crimson Aegis, while on the other hand, you have, well, everything else. It's a great tree that feels unique given the setting of the game, but it's clear, at least to us, that blood isn't all that it's cracked up to be. At the end of the day, there are some standout spells that may work for a specific build or your playstyle, but as far as a tree that performs top to bottom, well, the hunt continues. We hope you guys enjoyed our rankings of the blood abilities in VRising. If you have any questions or want to share your rankings of the blood abilities, you know what to do. Leave us a comment down below, and we'll do our best to get back to you. Of course, if you did like this video and you want us to continue on with our ranking series, we need your help. Hit that thumbs up and consider subscribing. It's still the single best way to help channels like ours reach new audiences. If you are interested in joining our VRising private server, consider joining us on Discord. We've got a small PvP server with 2x resources set up for anyone to use. Just check out the link below and join today. Finally, if you like everything we're doing here on the channel and you want to support us even more, you can do so by becoming a member. For just a few bucks, you're helping Livin and I achieve our dreams, becoming full-time content creators. Check out the join button below to learn more. My name is Codiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.